without good internet access in the rural communities, and with the challenges it faced for our students and the lack of socialization, the lack of ability to participate, we were going to suffer. And I said, we're going to back to school this September for in-classroom instruction. And guess what happened? You know, we had a national uptick in cases that impacted Arkansas as well. Schools all over the country said, no, we're going to stick to going virtual. I had protesters out in front of the governor's residence in coffins saying, you're going to kill us. We don't want to teach in school. I said, no, this is important for the students. We're going back to school. And they threatened protest, the unions did. And we made sure that we had substitute teachers, and we outlasted them. We had school, and the result is that our kids got educated. And there was a study done after the pandemic, and it ranked Arkansas number 2 in the nation in terms of days of in-classroom instruction during the pandemic. And I always add a little bit right there just as a political twist. Yes, we beat Florida. And so that's how I governed. And again, not perfect, but making the best judgments, considering freedom, considering the science, considering our culture, considering liberty. And I think we kept our schools, businesses open by and large. And so that was an important time. But then I finished 8 years, and of course that was because I'm term limited. And now I'm running for president, and people say, well, why are you running for president? Surely you're smart enough to know those are long odds. And yes, I see some nods there. Sure, they're long odds, but I've been fighting for 40 years to build the Republican Party, to provide options for voters, to have a voice that is conservative on the national stage. And when I see President Biden leading our country in the wrong direction, it's time for patriots to step up. And so I'm running. And I look at the policies of President Biden where he's failed on energy policy. He's failed on border security. He's failed on national security with our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. He's failed us in controlling federal spending and giving us an economy that works for the American people. In fact, he was in South Carolina yesterday. Did y'all see that? You know what he was talking about? Bidenomics. Well, I have a definition for Bidenomics, and that is high inflation, excessive federal spending, high interest rates, and a stagnant economy. That's Bidenomics for you. And well, we'll get to that. And yes, he failed on border policy. Absolutely, he did. And he continues to do so. And so we need to make those course corrections. And what you'll see from me, if I have the honor to serve as President of the United States, is a pro-growth energy policy. Biden said it's all going to be green, and I say, no, we need all of that. We need to drill, we need to produce, we need to be independent, and we do not need the President of the United States going to Afghanistan or to Saudi Arabia and saying, please, please, can you produce more oil? We need to produce, we need to have energy, and I'll have a pro-growth energy policy. Secondly, you're going to see a secure border. When I was head of the DEA, I went down to Mexico, and I knew that we had a problem with the cartels. And so I go and see President Vicente Fox, and I say, we need to work together to go after the cartels that are killing our people, that are bringing drugs into our country. And he said, Mr. Secretary, we'll cooperate with you. We trained the Mexican police, we vetted their units, we shared intelligence with them, and we were targeting the Ariana Felix brothers who led the Tijuana cartel. And guess what happened? Within 30 days after we initiated this effort, Ben Amin, Ariana Felix, was captured, and his brother Ramon was killed by the Mexican police. Now, I'll tell you a story. I actually had a news conference down there, and the Mexican media was just pushing and pushing me and saying, Mr. Secretary, what does the United States want the government of Mexico to do? And I said, you're a sovereign country. We didn't come down here to tell you what to do. Well, they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And so, of course, then I blurted out and said, okay, I'll tell you what we want, and that is the Ariana Felix brothers, and I don't care whether you get them dead or alive. Well, again, Attorney General Ashcroft loved to crisscross the country and say, I sent Asa down to Mexico, and he told him he wanted the Ariana Felix brothers dead or alive, and the government of Mexico gave him one of each. And so the leadership of America makes a difference. And since then, the government of Mexico has withdrawn from their level of cooperation. They have given the cartels a green light. The result is fentanyl flooding into our cities. The result is human suffering. People are dying trying to cross the border. It's a mistake of this administration. It's a mistake of policy that has to be corrected. We've got to support the Border Patrol. We've got to reform our asylum laws. We have to declare the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Whenever you look at what needs to be done in our country as well, I had a record of signing 30 pro-life bills as governor of Arkansas. Whenever we signed the trigger law, that meant when Roe versus Wade was reversed, I went over to the Attorney General, we held a news conference and declared that abortion was now illegal in Arkansas, except when the life of the mother is at risk. And whenever you look at the challenge we face, there's one commitment that I will make, and that is I will stop the leftist social agenda coming out of Washington, D.C. that pushes our businesses and pushes our schools down a path of culture that we don't want them to go. I believe in freedom of the individual to make decisions, but I don't want the government pushing a leftist social agenda. And what am I speaking about? I'm speaking about when they tell the businesses you've got to have a good ESG score. Whenever you're telling retirement funds, you better be sure that you invest in retirement funds that are socially sensitive. Well, when the government says you may, that's like pushing. We're going to stop that. Secondly, whenever President Obama was in office, he sent a letter to the school districts. And the school districts, he told them that you've got to open up your bathrooms for whatever gender the student decides they are that day. And he said he threatened the loss of federal funds if they did not comply with that. I immediately told our school districts, you may ignore the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education. You may ignore it because it's not in accordance with law, it violates common sense, and it is beyond the bounds of what the federal government is supposed to do. And so that's a kind of pushback I gave as governor. And let me tell you, we're going to reverse those policies on day one under a Republican administration. And so that's just a couple things. I know you're in the heat and you might have some questions for me, but I'm delighted for this opportunity. And people wonder, well, what, they always ask, that's the most frequently asked question of any candidate, well, what separates you from the other 11 candidates running? Well, I would just challenge you to look at the breadth of experience, and that no one running for president on the Republican side has a bigger, larger breadth of experience at the federal and at the state level on national security, border security, on drug enforcement, as a prosecutor in solving the challenges of crime in our inner cities. These are experiences I have and I bring to the table. And I would like to see a vigorous debate this year on policy, and so I have to get 40,000 donors, individual donors, to be on the debate stage. But the good news is $1 counts. And so you might be supporting your favorite candidate, and you might say, but we still want to have a vigorous debate. And so sometimes I'll take number 2, sometimes I'll take number 3. But if you give me $1, you help us to get on the debate stage. That's asa2024.com. I'll end with this. This is the best compliment I've ever had in my political career. I have to say, I was in Iowa campaigning. And I came across the constituents, and I was telling them about myself and running for president. And then I asked them about themselves. We had a nice conversation. And when it was over, they looked at me and said, "You're running for president of the United States. And you seem normal." That's a pretty high compliment. And I looked at him and I said, well, if anybody knows normal, Iowa knows normal. And so consider me normal, consider me blue collar, consider me dedicated to making sure that we reverse the terrible policies of the Biden administration. Thank you, and God bless you.
Hear me? Any questions for the governor? Do you have a question?
We got a number of questions here.
Hello, Governor. I have two quick questions for you. The first is, as governor of Arkansas, what is the nature of your relationship with the Clintons now and any time in the past? Have you done business with them? Are you friends with them? What's the nature of your relationship?
Well, I'm the only person that's prosecuted 2 Clintons. So,
Which ones?
well, I was United States attorney, and I prosecuted Roger Clinton for cocaine violations, and he went to prison. And Bill Clinton was governor of the state at the time. And I say that because you asked me about my relationship, and actually Bill Clinton, in his autobiography, My Life, he gives credit for me for saving his brother's life because having consequences for the addictions that he had and the criminal acts that he had helped change him, I hope. But then when I was in the United States Congress, of course, I was a prosecutor on the impeachment case on obstruction of justice against President Clinton. And so we've always had an adversarial, but a relationship that I was chairman of the party whenever he was governor. And so we've always been on opposite sides of the fence.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Sure.
My second question is, do you believe the 2020 election was stolen?
In the 2020 elections, there were irregularities that were taken to court. Do I believe they were stolen? I believe that Joseph Biden is the president of the United States.
Legitimately?
Well,
Legitimately?
I think under our system, he got elected president of the United States. And, we look to the future, and I think our response to what happened in 2020 should be to have greater voter integrity at the ballot box, to make sure that our laws are enforced in terms of election integrity, and that we make corrections where necessary to do that. And it's hard to do that in a blue state. And so, yes, we've got to make changes. I know that in Arkansas, we have I signed the law for voter ID to make sure that whoever votes is somebody who's authorized to vote, and one individual, they're not voting twice. That's voter integrity. So that's what we have to pursue as a party, and we present solutions for the future.
Nick?
Yes. Is this working?
Yeah, I hear you
Okay.
perfect.
Our founding fathers had envisioned a country of small, limited government. What would you do as president to bring us back to a limited government? Every level of government, in my estimation, is spending way out of hand. I don't care if it's the county, I don't care if it's the city, I don't care if it's the state or the federal. Everybody spends too much money and they tax us. And what would you do?
Great question, and the answer is that as governor of Arkansas, I reduced state government employees by 14%. 3,000 fewer state workers. That's shrinking government. We went from 42 different departments of government reporting to me down to 15. That's management. That's controlling the size of government. As president, the first thing I will do would be to put in a hiring freeze on non-defense employees, and I will reduce the federal employment in the non-defense area by 10%. That's money, and actually it's been certified as to saving hundreds of billions of dollars over a period of time. Secondly, it's important to get control of the administrative state. And so as governor, I had every regulatory action have to be approved by the governor's office before it could be implemented. And so we're going to have a robust review of any administrative rules that come out to make sure they do not infringe upon freedom, that they're accomplishing and consistent with legislative guidelines. That's the problem in Washington, is that the bureaucracy takes what Congress says and then writes their own language in the rules. The rules have to be challenged if they're not consistent with congressional mandates. So those are just a couple of things. Whenever it comes to Medicaid, and the big programs, I want to give the governors more flexibility. I put into place in Arkansas a work requirement that says if you're on Medicare getting government benefits and you're healthy and you're able-bodied, then you either need to be working, in school, learning a job, or they ought to be volunteering. The Biden administration said, no, you can't do that. As president, I will give the states more flexibility to manage their program, particularly to put in a work requirement on some of those social programs. And so those are just a couple of things that I would do in terms of cost of government. Back there.
Hello, Governor. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfect.
Okay, great.
What a great system.
Oh.
You can be in the woods and I can hear you.
So we used to use these for our medical freedom rallies. This is an awesome purchase, so that's my question. Now that we know all the fraud and all the things that Dr. Fauci has done and Rand Paul's sticking up for, fighting against what's happened, where do you stand now that we know about the vaccines and that kind of stuff? When you become president, where do you stand for medical freedom?
There's not going to be mandates for the vaccine. That's a matter for families to make a decision on, individuals to make a decision on. As governor, we didn't put any mandates out there for government pushed vaccines. In fact, whenever the president said the National Guard has to be vaccinated, I told my adjutant general to make sure that anybody who wants an exception gets an exception. And so that's how we implemented it. And if anybody in the military lost their status or lost their position because of a refusal to take a vaccine that had not been approved, then I'll make sure that they have the opportunity to get back in the military.
Hey, Governor, thanks for coming. Policy sounds great and all that, but in the coming digital world, the number one priority, I think, is are we living under a two-tiered justice system? And particularly the ability for government to surveil us, any of our activities, restrict our economic transactions. What is your plan to reform the Department of Justice and restrict your old buddies in
Yeah. Listen,
that department?
Great question. Thank you. First of all, I applaud the federal judge in Louisiana that ruled the shadow banning is unconstitutional. Now, what the shadow banning means is that you've got a federal agency that goes to a social media company and saying, unless you ban these accounts or individuals for their speech, then you could suffer an antitrust investigation. And so that was held unconstitutional, but that's just, in my judgment, the tip of the iceberg. And so what you do about it is there's going to be cases in which you need to have a law enforcement agency going to a social media company and saying, hey, you're promoting jihad executions here that's violent. You need to be aware of that. That's okay. But anytime you do that, there should be transparency. I want, if you're going to do a report to a private company about what they consider improper conduct, report that to Congress. Shed the light of day on it, and that will bring transparency and accountability. That's on that one issue. But more broadly, there has been instances of two tiers of system of justice. Definitely, people have lost confidence in what the Justice Department has done in reference to Hillary Clinton and how that was handled versus President Trump or someone else. And so the answer is, I'm going to have a new Attorney General that supports equal enforcement of the law. I'm going to reform the FBI to make them more accountable and transparent. I'm actually going to be having a news conference probably in a couple of weeks that will outline specifics on my reform of federal law enforcement. And some of that gets in the weeds, but it's important to bring that accountability and focus, and you'll see a reduced jurisdiction for the FBI. Yes, sir.
Governor, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Do you have an opinion on digital currency?
You know,
And do you know how it is for folks to deal with it nowadays? I like to share an anecdote real quickly. We were at a restaurant yesterday having nice shrimp and grits. Love that stuff. And when we're talking about,
yeah, I can hear you. Well, maybe I can't.
we're there we go. Paying off the bill, we want to give you a nice tip. Well, if you have to put on a credit card or some other card, then that's going to end up going to some person that's taxable. So we looked at the bill and we decided, here, we're going to put 20% on the plate, and the rest is going to be paid by a credit card. That's not right.
That's not right to leave cash on the table and the rest by credit card?
No, we paid the majority by credit card, and the tip was left on the table.
And what was
Because
what's
so that
not
would
right?
not have to be reported. And I'm not advocating cheating on your taxes. Well, maybe I am.
Well, yeah.
But the point is, we shouldn't have to be making payments all directly from our funds, say, for example, from your bank account, from your credit account, all that kind of stuff. That is wrong to have it limited.
But good point. Now, I separate that from a discussion on digital currency. On that, that's the excessive use of of credit cards and moving away from cash in our society. And that's not the government pushing it. That is individual business decisions. And so I don't know that the government ought to be telling businesses you can't use credit cards, you ought to use cash, or telling them what to do at all on how they manage their business. Now, in terms of digital currency, I'm still learning about that, but digital currency is the demarcation I would draw is I don't want the government to have access to how you spend your money in the digital world, and so that's what you've got to protect against. And so I think you had a follow-up though.
Yeah, and I don't want guns that I have either.
There you go. All right. Hey, yes, I believe in the Second Amendment. All right. Couple more questions here. Is that good? Couple more. Yes, ma'am, or wherever.
Thank you for coming, Governor. I stepped into a public school classroom in 1973 as a teacher and out in 2023. I'm an advocate of public schools the way they were. What is your opinion on the dissolution of the Department of Education?
So, first of all, I believe in choice in education. My children, we started a Christian school back in the late 70s, so my children would have an option in education and that the values would not be undermined. Whenever you look at choice in education, we've homeschooled some of our children. And then our kids graduated from the public schools in high school. So parents ought to have choices in education. That competition, those choices for parents is critically important, and that's what we need to follow. You ask about the Department of Education. I don't think it's necessary. I look at the functions of the Department of Education. They need to be cut down. Now, some of them are student loans, some of them are Pell Grants, and so there's functions there that have to go somewhere. I look at that as a management point. What the most important thing I'm going to concentrate on is reducing federal employment by 10%, and much of that's going to come out of the Department of Education.
And just to follow that up, if we brought those decisions back to the states and they were not regulated by that Department of Education, which we have absolutely no control over, no touch with, and those decisions were being made in South Carolina, we have much greater opportunity to make change if we're making it here.
Amen, amen. There's no reason that the federal government that provides 10% of education funding should dictate 90% of the policy. Those policies should be handled by the local school district and by parents.
Well, that's the question so Carrie has been here.
Yeah, you've waited in the sun. You deserve a question.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Governor. I was just wondering what you would do about all the illegal immigrants that are here now. What would you do with them?
Well, first of all, I do believe in immigration. Immigration is important for our country. It's a foundation of our democracy. We all know people that we love that are first generation, second generation, and they really bring a lot of energy to our country. But we're a sovereign country. We need to follow the rule of law. And so, first of all, we've always addressed immigration in terms of comprehensive immigration reform, which is, let's secure the border, but then let's deal with the 11 million or however many are here that don't have a legal status. Well, we've got to separate those two. No one wants to, and we should not deal with the population here until we secure the border to make sure we're not going to have 11 million more 5 years from now. And so I want a simple border security bill that gives me the authority to secure our southern border specifically and the resources that need to be done on that. Once that is done, we can come back and we can look at the issues of those that are here already that are really ingrained in our society, but that's a second issue. Last
Thank
question.
you, Governor, for being here. At the Commerce Club last night, if I heard you correctly, that you would support sending Abrams tanks to Ukraine. My question is, do you support further American involvement in Ukraine and sending more of their tax money to Ukraine?
Well, I don't support sending our personnel there, but I do support our material and our equipment supplies to Ukraine. Like in Arkansas, we talk about how much money is being spent. Some of that's being spent in Arkansas with the HIMARS that are the anti-aircraft weaponry that's been very effective there. So a lot of that money is spent here in building up our capacity. But here's the important point on Ukraine. There's Article 5 of the NATO Convention. Article 5 says that we have to defend NATO countries with our personnel, with our troops, and we have to be fully committed. Ukraine is not an article, they're not part of NATO. And I don't want to send our personnel there. But if we lose in Ukraine, and I say we, if Ukraine loses and Russia takes over and then Poland is threatened, then all of a sudden we've got an Article 5 commitment there as personnel. I want to make sure we stop Russian aggression there in Ukraine. So I do support that. I also think it has an impact on China and their aggressiveness toward, they're watching. And if they see weakness there, I think you'll see China more aggressive. So America needs to stay strong and committed. We ought to audit. We ought to make sure we measure and we can debate what exactly should be spent, but we should not abandon Ukraine that's fighting for their sovereign territory. Y'all have been great. Thank you all for
May
the.
I ask one question, please?
All right, we got.
When you're in the Oval Office as President of the United States, what are your first 3 consecutive orders?
Well, the first executive order would be reverse all of Biden's executive orders. And seriously, I mean, we got to reverse many of the things that he's done that's given direction to his agencies. For example, the Department of Labor and their ESG requirements. We got to change that. Secondly, would be to say, build the wall. Biden stopped building the wall. There's tens of millions of dollars of material ready to build the wall. We'll start immediately reconstructing that. And then third is to make sure that we have that hiring freeze I mentioned. So the third executive order would be to slow the growth of government, to reduce the number of our federal government non-defense employees. Thank you all very much.
One more question here. I have one more question here.
Oh, Villa, okay, sorry. I promise you.
When you were governor of Arkansas, you mentioned a minute ago that on the first day you would reverse all of the radical social policies. But when you were governor of Arkansas 2 years ago, the Save Adolescents from Experimentation Act was on your desk to prevent the so-called gender-affirming care to minors, including hormones, puberty blockers, and transition-related surgeries, and yet you vetoed that. Can you explain why, please?
Sure. Two reasons. One, I believe in parents, that they ought to make decisions about vaccines, and they ought to make decisions on the most sensitive health care issues of the children. And of course, there's limits on that. Secondly, I believe in the Constitution. And that law was unconstitutional, has been held unconstitutional. And I would have signed a law without any hesitation because I believe it's an appropriate state role of limited government. I would have signed a law that prohibited transgender surgery for minors. That's unconscionable, it's permanent, it should not be done. But I believe that God created two genders. I believe God created two genders, and there shouldn't be confusion on that. But if there is confusion, parents should guide the children in terms of how to deal with those issues and not government. And of course, there's lines you draw, but that's the debate we have as Republicans. What's the appropriate limited role government? If we say we believe in parents and making decisions on the education of our children, surely parents ought to make routine health care decisions for the children as well. I don't want California telling the school districts they cannot tell the parents that the children want to transition. That's an inappropriate role of government, and the left is using the government. Let's not follow in the same trap and say we're going to use the power of government to tell parents what to do unless it's that extreme measure that I identified that I would have signed.
Well said. Well, thank you, Governor. I'm sorry we kept you so long in the heat, but we really enjoyed it. We think you did a great job. Thank you, everyone, for all the questions, and have a safe trip back to Arkansas.
Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Can we get you some food or something? That's great.